Our next panel, Who Will Replace Khamenei, will examine the options that lay ahead for Iran and what each means for Iranians, the US, and the world. Joining us for this panel are Len Khodorkovsky, Senior Advisor at the Kratch Institute for Tech Diplomacy, Adam Lovinger, VP of Strategic Affairs at the Gold Institute, and Behnam Taleblu, Iran Program Director at FDD. The panel will be moderated by Nufti's Senior Policy Analyst, Andrew Ghalili. Please join us in welcoming our speakers.
Thank you all for sticking around for the afternoon sessions today. This afternoon session is going to be about the upcoming succession crisis. Before we get into the topic of the panel, the news of the last hour is that the IAEA, according to the Wall Street Journal, has reportedly agreed to a deal with Iran. If you want to just give a couple comments, all of you, on the implications of that, what that could mean for snapback, or what we thought was about to be snapback being triggered.
Well, thank you, Nufti. As always, it's a pleasure to be here again. Your Highness, it's a pleasure to see you. Let's start with some bad news, because the morning my friend Kamran got to lead with some good news. There is some bad news, which is that this is a tried and true tactic that we've seen the Islamic Republic employ for years now, both against the UN, the IAEA, the Europeans, and even against the Americans. But we have to call a spade a spade. What the modalities are that the Iranians and the International Atomic Energy Agency just agreed to, that stuff, that devil in the details, absolutely matters, but that still remains to be seen. Right now is the time for a community of analysts and advocates and passionate folks like yourself to make sure that all of the Western countries continue to have it known to be in their political interest, in their strategic interest, and in their moral values to continue to call a spade and call for pressure against the Islamic Republic, and not to relent and not to settle for when Tehran offers something too little, and to call it indeed too little, too late. We can't fall for this trick again. We have to make sure that elected representatives of the Iranian American community, of the American national interest in general, and of our friends abroad, whether they be in Europe or Australia or in Canada, can actually have the full backing of their constituents to make sure that the Iranians don't get to run circles around the IAEA, and certainly not post-12-day war.
Thanks. Adam?
Yeah, just very briefly, I think we've been down this road before. In the 45 years of the existence of the Islamic Republic, we've seen international organizations, mainstream media, woke, even before it was called woke, people on the left and the right, make excuses, throw lifelines to the Islamic Republic, and the overall momentum has always gone in the same direction. I remember, as many of you in this room probably do, when the IAEA permitted Iran, the Islamic Republic, to monitor itself and report on its own compliance with the JCPOA. It's a flawed organization, filled with people. Some are more decent than others, but the momentum is so in favor of having no support for the Islamic Republic's integrity or capacity to adhere to these international laws and rules.
I'll just keep it simple. Nothing changes. Unfortunately, our European friends never miss a chance to miss an opportunity. So even though, and the devil's in the details, obviously, it's hard to comment on the details, but I think the long-term outlook is the same today and the same at this hour that it was 2 hours ago, which is the regime is at its weakest point since 1979, and no attempt to prop it up through tried and true methods is going to prevent the arc of history to change. The damage of the 12-day war and the decimation of the regime's proxies and America's overt strike on Iran's facilities on Iranian soil and various other developments since October 7th have created a trajectory that has emasculated the regime. The nuclear card that the regime has played was leveraged by its nuclear threats and bullying. Those threats don't have the same power now that we know the emperor has no clothes. So stay the course. The regime is no more powerful this hour than it was last. And regardless of what folks who are addicted to, quote unquote diplomacy are trying to achieve, we know that it's going to have the same effect that it had in the past, which is no effect. It's only buying the regime time, and throwing it a lifeline is no solution to the real issues that are threatening our national security, even our European friends' national security. So I would say, too bad, but we'll keep moving forward, and I think the trajectory toward regime collapse, or the theme of this panel of what happens after Khamenei is still relevant, and this is not going to change that.
Thank you all. Len, you mentioned long-term. I think today's topic might not be such a long-term panel, but a short-term topic to talk about of who will replace Khamenei. He's approaching 90. He's been very sick. On whatever cocktail of drugs they have him on, he still looks very sick. He can barely speak in the videos we see. Can you all outline the options for what could come next? And if you were betting men, how much you would bet on each option? We can go down the line.
Sure, I'll let the betting go to the betting men, the braver men to my right. But let me just outline 3 things that, again, as a community of analysts and advocates, also policymakers in this town and in any town that does have a foreign policy impacted or affected by the Islamic Republic of Iran, 3 things, 3 scenarios, all of which are non-linear, that you need to keep in the back of your mind. 1, evolution. As fake as it sounds, basically there are people trying to sell you already, with Khamenei still being 86, an Islamic Republic 2.0. A kindler, gentler, but in real life not kindler or nor gentler Islamic Republic 2.0 that permits a headscarf to be moved back about a couple of centimeters, that doesn't march on the flags of sovereign nations, but still poses the direct threat to the interests and the values of the Iranian people as well as civilized people around the world. They're going to sell you an Islamic Republic 2.0. That's evolution. Then there's the thing that any patriot fears, which is devolution. This is the Middle East. Things can always go from bad to worse. We have to be honest about that. We have to have that up front in the back of our minds. Iranian history has shown that it is a very turbulent history. You can have people selling you something positive, but it can go negative. So think devolution. Be prepared to offset some of the worst possible outcomes. And then there's the third thing, which many are hoping for in this room and in rooms like this around the world, and certainly on streets in Iran, which is revolution. One is the society, one is the elite, one is abroad. Think evolution, devolution, and revolution when you're talking about a post-Khamenei Islamic Republic of Iran. Right now, things certainly, the moral weight, as Len was saying, the arc of history, if you believe in this stuff, is on the side of revolution. But forgive me, the facts right now are not yet on the side of revolution. It is our job to help make it on the side of revolution. That is why you have all gathered here today.
Actually, this is much simpler in my mind. And change may happen even before Khamenei is dead. And what I think change looks like after the Islamic Republic is in this room. It's at this table. And His Royal Highness is the change. That's actually not just me saying that. That is what the Iranian people have been conveying for a while now. Regardless of what the official, and as Natan Sharansky said, the Sovietologists and the Iran experts have no idea what and when change really comes. Today, the regime is in power, and tomorrow it's not. And I think there are too many fundamentals that are pointing toward the collapse of the regime in my mind. It could be tomorrow, it could be in 3 weeks, or it could be, in a year or two, but we don't know that sitting here. What I do know is that Behnam, as you said, whether it's regime 2.0, it's still going to be the regime. And I think the Iranian people are done with the regime. So what is that trigger moment that finally provides the opportunity for the Iranian people to finally seize their destiny and do what they all believe? And there's enough credible reporting to suggest that His Royal Highness is the most popular leader of the opposition among the Iranian people. The opposition has been gradually unifying. I think the Munich conference has been a great boost to the opposition. All of you here in this room, I think, are know in your hearts that it's just a matter of time. The regime is brittle, and it will collapse. Now, it doesn't mean that we can all sit back and relax and wait for it to happen. All of us have a job to do. We can all do something. Obviously, the people on the ground have the greatest burden to bear, and they're the ones putting their lives on the line, and certainly they've suffered enough over 46 years. But all of us can help, and all of us can send the right signals to the people on the ground, and we all have to work with governments in our countries, here in the United States, Europe, and elsewhere in the Middle East, to communicate the reality that the people are aware of. The regime has no legitimacy. It has no power other than guns. And as you've heard from Natan Sharansky, the guns didn't help the Soviet Union survive, and they haven't helped other regimes survive, and they're not going to help the Islamic Republic survive. So I ask all of you not to wait for history to happen on its own, but to be an active agent in history. And personally, I believe that history is here in this room. And if all of us can put our efforts and creativity and resources behind the movement to help the Iranian people achieve freedom that they so deserve, we can finally rid of one of the most glorious and accomplished nations in the world, its rightful historic place in the world, and allow its people to finally, after a 46-year hiccup, artificial hiccup, to move forward and achieve the things that it so rightly deserves, and is ready to, as people have said on other panels, to play a vital role in creating the future, not just for themselves, the region, but for the entire world.
I see the Islamic Republic today like the Titanic in 1912. It set sail from Liverpool with a fatal flaw, and it hit this iceberg. And that iceberg for the Islamic Republic was the 12-Day War. You asked about the various candidates who are running for office, jockeying, positioning for places in a new leadership structure. These are like the cabin boys who are rearranging the deck chairs and fiddling with the lifeboats. The regime is going down, and it almost really doesn't matter. These are just strategically insignificant little tactical maneuvers. It's imperative for us to prepare for what happens next. The regime is going down. It's having its Titanic moment. The planning, must be put in place. And I come from a background of strategic planning at the Pentagon, the National Security Council. What is absolutely imperative is for there to be a net assessment done on what are all the governing forces that are going to shape the success or failure of the new Iran. And that begins by looking at all the strategically significant forces, shaping the evolution of Iran. It requires looking at future scenarios, what could things be like the day of collapse or the day after. It requires then, playing these scenarios out, looking at various challenges and starting to think about all the governing dynamics between the forces of good, the forces of evil that could evolve over time. And then from this analysis, this multidisciplinary analysis, which is very hard work, but it can be done, to identify the strategic opportunities and the threats that will then become the basis for a strategy. Because any strategy that is not done with that contextual understanding is sort of operating in a vacuum. And what's happening now in Iran is so complex, there are so many moving forces, that it absolutely screams out for a net assessment to make sure that whatever planning we're doing is grounded in the most strategically significant forces that will shape success. And it's absolutely right. I have to, join in. This is going to be a bloody, difficult process, and there is only one man who can provide the space, the strategic space that is needed to minimize the bloodshed, to bring the nation together so it doesn't fragment, to have the legitimacy to unite people both in Iran and in the world, and that is the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. And I'll just end that Americans are uncomfortable with hereditary monarchs, and this is not the United States. That said, this is a humanitarian, human rights consideration, and it's about political stability. It's about lives, and it's not our place to preach what other people should do. It is our place to ensure there's stability and security in the Middle East. And really only one man can deliver that, and that is Reza Pahlavi. So thank you.
Thank you. We'll dive into the regime change, revolution side in a little bit, but first, for analytical purposes, I want to talk a little bit about the other two. So the potential for, let's say, Khamenei's son to take over, or for reformists, as Behnam was describing, to take over. In both instances, in the first, how could the U.S. Exploit that to point out the regime's real illegitimacy? And for the reformist camp, I mean, we saw Khamenei select a reformist president in this last election. We saw that plan really work for a lot of U.S. media. We saw how U.S. media covered the war, and they went to Tehran and acted as if everyone in Iran was suddenly potentially rallying around the flag. So given all of that, what are some concerns with those two outcomes, and how can the U.S., whether it's the community in the diaspora or whether it's policymakers in the government, exploit those scenarios, or the potential for those scenarios, at least, as they're upcoming? Sure, we can start if.
Yeah, I've worked in the U.S. government for about 20 years, and we're not very good at sort of manipulating processes in other governments. We just aren't. There's something about the American sort of strategic culture that makes us very bad at that. I think there's a risk with getting too tactical. I think America needs to be strategic, which is really where President Trump's instincts are, is sort of to shift the rules of the game to benefit America's comparative advantages. Pitting one actor off another in Iran, I don't even think that that's something we can do, or even necessarily the best idea. And the reason why is that if we do that, if we involve ourselves, if the U.S. government involves ourselves in that process, we are dignifying the process. We don't recognize the Islamic Republic of Iran. I was looking previously before this conference at the characteristics of a failed state. There's about 6 characteristics. The Islamic Republic of Iran fits all of them. It's not a legitimate country anymore. I mean, as far as under international law. And of course, the people feel the same way. There's people bandy around the statistic: 80% of the people don't support the regime. I would say it's higher than that. But also, when you look at even the leadership structure, the rulers who really hold the power, these guys have shown. October 7th really, someone used the analogy "the emperor has no clothes," showed that all of the claims they've made that God is on their side, it is false. They have failed in every possible way. If God truly was on their side, they would have been in a much better position. They would not be lording over a failed state. So the emperor does have no clothes. And finally, it's been shown, I think, clearly that many of the leaders inside the Islamic Republic are highly compromised for their own purposes. They are working with foreign intelligence services that, essentially to, create their own lifelines to extricate them from this sinking ship, to use the Titanic analogy. And so even within the regime itself, so many of the various actors do not have legitimacy just because they're working with foreign governments and against the very regime they claim to represent.
I want to take a slightly different angle on this question. Do a little jujitsu move on regime change. The question of the panel is what happens next, which kind of puts us on this platform of trying to predict what happens next. We're not passive observers of the situation. We can be active participants in what happens next. We need to be active participants in what happens next. And part of that is, I think President Trump did everybody here a favor when he put the words regime change on the table. He broke the taboo of saying those words and contemplating that possibility. And now it should be an option for decision makers here in the United States and elsewhere. Among other options, well, we need to plan for the possibility. In my head, it's more than a possibility, it's the likelihood. Frankly, I don't even want to think about it as regime change, it's regime end that we're after. And that should now be a serious policy consideration. And what people in diaspora can do is to make sure that it's a viable option for American policymakers, that it's thought of that way, that it's built that way. And one of the things that I think can be analytically presented as a case for regime end is what are the costs of continuing this path that we've been on if we get to Khamenei 2.0 or regime 2.0, what are the costs of that? And what are the costs of completely making sure that there is no continuation of that the alternate path is toward enabling and empowering the Iranian people to do what they're capable of doing to become a good friend of the American people and of democracy around the world. We know, we've talked about all of the, economic possibilities, certainly cultural and diplomatic, but America has a lot to gain with a democratic, prosperous Iran. As we embark on a technological revolution, Iran has a lot to offer the United States and other democracies in terms of resources, talent, know-how. A country of 90 million, I don't know if all of them are engineers, but a lot of them are engineers, has a lot to offer the world in terms of building the kind of future that is compatible with all of our values. So I think, practically speaking, we can play a part in presenting an option to the US government and governments around the world as to the alternative, as to the post-regime alternative. Practically speaking, what that looks like, how much that's going to cost versus the cost of enabling the same set of threats that come from the regime as it is right now. How much does it cost to have to spend time and resources and all sorts of efforts to keep an unstable terrorist regime in power and not know when it's going to destabilize the world versus putting the kind of conditions in place and the kind of more predictable situation in place that's going to benefit the American national interest and the national interest of the free world. I think we have to stop thinking of this as a subject that we can talk about. I think President Trump introduced this topic, and I think we should seize the opportunity and do the kind of work necessary to make it into a tangible option and opportunity for the U.S. and the world. And look, right now, beyond the Iranian people, there's only one country that is trying to shape what happens after the regime ends, and that's Israel. Israel is the only country that is proactively Israel is the only country that is today unapologetically trying to shape the future, not only in their own self-interest, not only in the interest of the Iranian people, but in the interest of the free world. Imagine if the United States and other democracies banded together with Israel and have, through I would say beyond maximum pressure, through excruciating pressure, unbearable pressure, and other means, have made the decision for the world, which made the regime impossible to continue. And I think that is in the realm of possibility. I think Israel has shown the way, and whether there's a political will to act on this is up to governments and decision makers around the world. But we know now that it's possible. We know now the emperor has no clothes. We know now that it's up to us to decide the future, whether it's going to be the future of uncertainty and destabilization and constant IAEA negotiations and JCPOA 34.0, or we're going to redesign the future, which we know now we are in much stronger position to do now that the regime has no leverage whatsoever to continue surviving. So if it does survive, it's only going to be because all of us threw it another undeserved lifeline, which is going to prop it up in power, but it certainly doesn't deserve it. It's certainly not an option that makes any sense for us. And I think we need to make a decision and seize this moment in time and decide that the 46th year of the regime is the last year, and the future is going to be 180 degrees different.
Thank you, Len. Behnam, I would love your take on the original question, but Len made two important points I'd like to hear first. One, that President Trump broke the taboo of talking about regime change. I would say that's something Nufti and Cameron and everyone here has been working on for years. Do you agree that that taboo has been broken, first of all? And then second of all, on the comment about the cost of change versus the cost of stasis, how can the US government evaluate that and come to a real conclusion? I know our thoughts, but how can they do that?
Sure. So just first to the heart of the original question, when the Islamic Republic is offering you being in this audience and also Western policymakers, the evolution option, what it is banking on is you not being able to make both the financial consideration as well as the strategic and political consideration that Len charged you with here today. It's assuming that you will not draw up the ledger needed, and instead it is offering you what we call a path of least resistance. It is offering you an alternative, which is to continue some variant of the 4+ decade ups and downs of US, European, Western containment policy. The West has basically had different iterations of one policy: containment, rollback, isolation, hoping to force change but not willing to spend time and money and assets in a measurable, meaningful way, sometimes because we have to be honest, policymakers don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. Policymakers don't see a winning strategy, and they don't see one that they can achieve on their own limited time in office. This is the real world we're talking about here. These are how decisions are actually made. And we actually have to impact this calculus. And doing a real balance sheet saying, I don't think it's cheaper for a tin pot dictator to be able to credibly threaten the life of a sitting US president. I don't think that makes it cheaper for anybody. I don't think it makes it cheaper where every single US president after George W. Bush has come into office saying we'll do less in the Middle East, and then ends up being forced to spend more time, more capital, more resources, both in blood and in treasure, to actually have to do more to counter and contain the Islamic Republic of Iran. So whether you're counting carrier strike groups or missile defense assets in the region, these are all things that need to go very much into that calculation that Len was just mentioning. And on regime change or different iterations of this word, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, I still think it's treated in this town like beyond a political third rail. The president said something online, and I think it was true for that moment in time. The charge is up to you to make it sticky, to not make it something that slips away and was ignored on social media. The charge is actually up to you to make sure folks in Congress actually can get out ahead of this issue, can actually build a constituency on this issue, can actually fundraise on this issue, can actually win with this issue. This is the democratic process. This is the test case to see if you can take legitimate action, legally, politically available to you in really the world's most robust democracy today.
Can I just add one thing? So I think it was brilliant for President Trump to use the term regime change. The image of Saddam Hussein looking like a disheveled madman coming out of a spider hole, or when I was at the Pentagon, I saw a photograph that I don't think was ever made public of Osama bin Laden's head that had been shot off. The top of it was removed, and the SEAL team was instructed to eliminate him that way so that his facial features were not damaged, so he can be identified very clearly. I think it was a great move to use the term. I do believe, however, that regime change, it does have a very dirty word. People think about what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan, boots on the ground. None of us should hang our hopes on that. I also think that we need to be very sober about what to expect from the U.S. government. I believe, from experience, that the real strategic planning effort must be done with us. It's not being done in the U.S. government. It's so complicated, it's difficult. Earlier this year, the only Office of Net Assessment in the whole Pentagon was dissolved, in the U.S. government. It was dissolved in the Pentagon. That long-range strategic planning, complicated scenarios, looking at the messiness of regime transitions, building new countries, this is not being done in the U.S. government. It must be done with you.
I love the image, and I haven't seen that image.
I don't think it's public.
No, but in my mind, it's public. The lobotomized bin Laden, yeah. I think I'm going to think about that one. And I'm going to think about, Tucker Carlson sending condolences to his family and that picture in my mind. I think the bigger issue here is, I think you have to recognize that there is no appetite in the United States today, after 20 years of being bogged down in Iraq and Afghanistan, to do anything comparable. And Adam is correct. That is the reality, and that's not going to change. But the opportunity is, and I've experienced this firsthand in my conversations with a lot of people in Congress and policymaking circles, I don't think enough people understand the difference between Iran and Iraq. I don't think enough people understand the nuances and the calculations at play. Not to say that anyone is asking for American boots on the ground. Not even the Iranian people are asking for American boots on the ground. Yet the visual of what we've done in 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan is associated with American boots on the ground. That is not what is being contemplated. That is not what's going to be necessary. I think the conversation is more analogous to me. Again, I have a personal experience with how it felt to be on the other side of the Iron Curtain in the Soviet Union. I don't think any dissidents in the Soviet Union expected America to invade Russia or the Soviet Union at the time. But as Sharansky has said, all of the people behind the Iron Curtain were emboldened. Their backbone was stiffened when they heard words of support and actual assistance in different ways, both from government and well-meaning private citizens, to sympathize with their cause, to stand with them, to make it clear that the evil empire is evil. That, when Sharansky was in his solitary cell and Reagan's words reached him, he felt stronger than his oppressors. And that the more that we can, and this is the least we can do, the least each of us can do and the least any democratic government can do is offer that to the Iranian people, the Venezuelan people, and any other people struggling to be free. They're no less deserving of freedom than we are here in America. But there's more that we could do, whether it's the things that we've been trying to do in terms of supplying communications channels, Starlink, and all sorts of assistance. All of those things should be on the table and more. But I think it's important to stay the course. Maximum pressure, excruciating pressure is a policy that's valid. We saw what could be accomplished with just the United States putting pressure on the regime in Iran. Just the United States brought Iran to within, a few months of collapse, in my mind. I think if President Trump won in 2020, I think that it was months away from collapsing. I think they were down to like $4 billion in foreign cash reserves, and which was less than Afghanistan, to put it in perspective. So there's a lot that the United States can do, and together, if all democracies band together and stay the course and call evil evil, and stops throwing the regime a lifeline, I think it will make it easier for the Iranian people to put the finishing touches on the regime, and then the world changes that day, and everything that we've been talking about and dreaming about is going to happen, and it doesn't have to require American or any other boots on the ground. The Iranian people are ready. All they need is emotional, financial, and communications support to do what they know how to do themselves.
Thanks. I think redefining regime change, as you mentioned, is a key goal for everyone in this room, and especially the diaspora, explaining that Iran is not, my colleague Timans and I had an op-ed a couple weeks ago, Iran is not Iraq. So I think explaining that repeatedly is very important. To end this, hopefully on a happier note or a more positive note, or maybe a charge to the community or anyone else, do you think the death of Khamenei, if the regime hasn't collapsed yet, will be the best chance for the regime change that we're talking about? And whether yes or no, do you think it would be the last chance for the type of regime change that we're talking about? Behnam, please.
Just on the charge to the community point, I think this point may have been lost in the weeds, but when I say that you can help folks build a constituency around this, when I explain the democratic process and how to build winning coalitions and to really win on this issue, it is to be honest about some of the similarities that do exist in the minds of American policymakers today between Iran and Iraq. But then it is to talk about the unique history of Iran versus Iraq, and for the policymaker, your job is to elaborate and say, here is the difference between foreign imposed regime change versus foreign supported regime change. That's the universe of difference. Foreign imposed versus foreign supported. I've said this before, so I'll say it again. We are right by the White House. There is a park right by the White House with 5 statues. 4 of them are foreigners. And those 4 that are foreigners helped with the founding of this country. So this isn't about making you less of a nationalist or about foreign interference, okay? This is about taking your country back and, dare I say, making Iran great again. That is the charge to the community. Now, you asked an analytical question about Khamenei, and I'm someone who tends to lean a little bit more on the risk-averse side, and this is what I fear, that if these steps are not taken now in the time that Khamenei is still the Middle East's longest-serving autocrat, the Islamic Republic will be more able to present you with the Evolution 2.0 framework. It'll be easier because you know what? DC is not having a conversation about regime change, but you know who is talking about regime change? The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. You know who is talking about regime change? In so many ways, Rouhani. In so many ways, Tajzadeh. In so many ways, these people and institutions that we don't like and that we don't think would be the best advocate of the Iranian national interest, that we don't think would be a good bridge builder with the Arabs in the region or with Israel or with America or with Western Europe or with anybody else. So therefore, it is up to us to act earlier. Yes, the death of Khamenei, given his institutionalization and centralization of power and his unfortunate political success at being the Middle East's longest-serving autocrat in the contemporary period, means that his death is more of an inflection point than ever before. But just because it's more of an inflection point than ever before does not allow folks to rest on their laurels and say that it's a one-bullet state. Because those forces who are talking about change, I'm not talking about the population, I'm talking about the elites and the moneyed and the vested interests that have helped make the Islamic Republic be able to sustain wave after wave of max pressure or supports or anything else that has been going on. It is them who are jockeying and talking about regime change, and your conversation needs to be louder and more realistic about it. So certainly his death is an inflection point, but it's an inflection point that we can't rest on our laurels on and that we can't miss, because their alternative will be, well, here's the path of least resistance. You had containment before, just settle for it again.
Final words, please.
Just 1 second. Yeah, so I really think there's like sort of two critical things that the U.S. could do right now. And I think these are in President Trump's instincts, was really just to focus, again, not on the tactical, internal, maneuverings within the regime, but the illegitimacy of the regime itself. Just no matter what they do, they're illegitimate. They've failed, number one. Number two is to look at the history. Len mentioned Natan Sharansky, this is the Reagan era. What ultimately convinced Reagan to pursue this forward strategy that brought down the Soviet Union is that his top advisors had put the time and effort into crafting really professional, professional grade strategies. They gave him the confidence that there was enough sort of, fiber and connective tissue in this vision that could actually be implemented. This is what really, convinced President Reagan to give the go-ahead. I think that, any leader will want to see that those who are advocating for some great, effort, like we are here, have really thought this through and done the analysis, done the assessments, and understand the governing dynamics of what we're going to be faced in the future.
Since we have no time left, I say, who cares about Khamenei? He is irrelevant. He's yesterday's news. He's on, this close to the ash heap of history. I think there are things we control and things we don't control. And if I were the Iranian people and the people who care about the Iranian people, I think it's time to unite behind His Royal Highness Reza Pahlavi. I think the choice is clear. There's darkness and there's light. There's terrorism and then there's peace. There's goodwill and then there's hatred and destruction. So I say to anyone within, within the earshot is that let's stop thinking about what the bad guys are doing and focus on what we can do to enact the kind of change that we want. And the opportunity to line up behind a leader who represents the kind of values and the kind of future that the Iranian people deserve is right in front of us. The Iranian people know this. There is good reason to believe that thousands of regime officials are defecting. They know the end is near. So let's stop imagining all sorts of scenarios that have never come true, that the regime is going to change its DNA, it never will, and that 2.0, 3.0, or 7.0 is not going to be beneficial to the United States, to the free world, or the Iranian people. And let's stop waiting for the forces of nature and forces of history to do the work for us and help the Iranian people to get behind a leader who's capable of bringing this change. And let's get it done, before, so that Khamenei himself can see that change during his miserable life.
Thank you. Yeah, we're about 5 minutes over, and we're already about an hour over on the conference. So, thank you all for the great panel, and we got a few more. So please stick around.